All right, are we ready? Welcome everyone to Sourland Conservancy's Talk of the Sourlands. I'm Lori Cleveland, Executive Director, and it's so good to see everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to the Watershed Institute for partnering with us to present this series, opening your doors and welcoming us all to your lovely home, and sharing this event with the folks who are viewing online. I'd also like to thank the Sourland Conservancy staff and volunteers who work tirelessly to plan and run our educational seminars and webinars. Please be sure to stop and say hi on your way out. And I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of our work. Are there any Sourland Conservancy members here tonight? Members make our work possible. Together, we've planted and protected more than 60,000 trees since 2020. We are losing more than 1 million, so we've got a long way to go. If you're not a member already, please consider supporting our work and help us spread the word. Now, if this is your first in-person Talk of the Sourlands seminar, welcome. Here's what to expect. I will introduce our speaker. He will speak for about an hour,
give or take,
ish, and then answer your questions. We'll send a follow-up email with links to books, articles, and other details that tonight's presenter references in his talk, so you can learn more about the topic. There'll be a link in that email to a very short survey. We've heard that folks are having trouble finding out about our events, so we want to know how you found us. Social media, word of mouth, flyer, whatever. And we want to hear your suggestions about how we can do a better job. So, thank you in advance for filling that out. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. Robert Alec has always had a passion for nature and wildlife, growing up on the waters of Long Island. Though he spent the past 10 years working in fisheries management programs on the federal level throughout the country, he has come to the Sourlands looking to help terrestrial wildlife in his local community. He joined the Sourland Conservancy in 2022, looking to help leave a lasting legacy for future generations to enjoy. In his spare time, he likes to spend time with his family, fishing, and learning more about native species he's working to protect. Thank you, Rob. Take it away.
all right, well, oh, I can see myself. Is it okay if I minimize this little screen here? Oh, yeah. That's terrifying. Oh my gosh, see myself, hear myself, oh my gosh. So thank you everyone for coming here tonight. As mentioned, my name is Robert Alec. There's already a bit of an introduction, so I guess I don't have to explain too much of myself. But I do, before I get into our organization and everything, want to thank you all for coming out. Not only for hearing us talk, but often people are curious about what to do, and I see many faces I recognize out here, but there's a few new faces. And so by coming out here, you're already doing a big part on trying to better ecology, better the environment. You're learning more. Even if this is something that you've heard before, it's always good to get a refresher. There's some things in here that many in the audience know about because many of you are involved with. But if you're not sure, you haven't heard of some things we do, well, then this is going to be a little good introduction. I will say I'm a rambler. I have notes here. I'm going to be reading off those notes to keep me on target. But if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about in the meantime, feel free to raise your hand. Because as much as I am a rambler, I do like to communicate. Otherwise, I don't want to get a little too robotic. So I'll get started. I'm honored to be here speaking to you today. My role and the work with the Conservancy is focused on one of the most unique and fragile places in New Jersey, the Sourland region. As many of you know, we're a small nonprofit, just a few staff. But we have a big mission, and that's to restore and protect this region's forests, streams, and habitats. And we do it by leaning heavily on collaboration. This collaboration involves not only volunteers, but students, municipalities, land trusts, state agencies, and partner nonprofits, which we're utilizing today with the Watershed Institute. Today, I want to introduce you to the Sourlands, if you're not already familiar. And a heads up, is this technically the Sourlands? Might be on the cusp of the Sourlands. No, many of you firmly in there. So if you didn't know, you're in the Sourlands right now. And I also want to introduce to you the importance of the region, talk about the devastation caused by the emerald ash borer, and look ahead at future challenges, and share the large-scale community-driven response that's underway to restore our ecosystem's health. I'd like to start by bringing up a roadmap of myths that I figured we might address along the way, and I'd like to dispel them during this presentation. The first myth being that tree planting is the only way to help the environment. We have many tools in our toolbox, that is one of them, but it's not the only one. We're only planting ash. Well, in reality, that'd be pretty silly. Oh, there's something up there. Is there any way to nix that? That's not part of my presentation. I know it's aesthetic. But yes, we have had people ask us before, since to replace the ash, should we just keep planting ash? And that's kind of silly. Not that it's a silly thing to ask, but it's a silly thing to do for the big reason why the ash die-out was so devastating, which I'll get into in a bit.
Yeah.
That it's,
Don't know if I can. Sorry. I can't actually get to that screen.
we're not going to replace something that just died with something that's probably just going to die. All invasive plants in my yard stay in my yard. That sounds lovely, and it sounds like you're doing a good job trying to keep it in your yard, but nature has other ideas. Barberry, though not very nutritious, is delicious to many bird species. So just because you're making sure there's no more barberry hopping up on your property doesn't mean that a bird doesn't think it's a nice gift to leave in somebody else's property, or even worse, in the middle of a nice healthy forest. Okay, fantastic. Won't the environment just heal itself? That's a tricky one, and that's something that's up for debate, but I'd like to say no. What happens in the Sourlands stays in the Sourlands. I know I took that from Vegas, and apparently it's not used enough, but that's simply not true. The Sourlands is a very important region, not because it's in a vacuum, because it's part of a much larger system than itself. Native plants are so messy and they don't look that nice. You might say that if you saw my yard, just because I have zero eye for fashion or making anything look aesthetic, but that's just simply not true. Native plants can be gorgeous, and we'll get into that. And deer are native, so they can't be that bad for the environment. And it's true, deer are native for the environment, but I will get into what happens when there is an imbalance of things. So we see here New Jersey in all of its lovely, colorful glory. No, that's not what you see when you walk around, but let's start with this. If you look at a geological map of New Jersey, you'll see all the colors representing different bedrock types. Cutting through Hunterdon, Somerset, and Mercer counties is a bold pink streak. Let me see, does this have a laser pointer on it? Hot diggity dog. Okay. Right there. See that? That's the Sourland region, and that's not just drawn up for geopolitical reasons, that's drawn up because that is the stone. That is diabase rock, formed during the late Triassic period about 200 million years ago, and that rock is resistant to farming and development. It made life uncomfortable for settlers, but it also protected the vast swath of forest that we call the Sourland region. Today, the Sourlands are the largest contiguous forest between New York and Philadelphia, the largest contiguous forest in New Jersey, the third largest contiguous forest in New Jersey after the Pinelands and the Highlands, home to forest, wetlands, and ridges that connect 7 municipalities and 3 counties, also home to 57 state-listed threatened and endangered species. It's also a continental important bird area, and that's one of just 113 in the entire United States. It's also a critical drinking water source for more than 800,000 residents between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So even folks just outside the range of what's considered the Sourland region are benefiting it from just drinking water alone. So when we talk about the Sourlands, we're talking about one of the last strongholds of biodiversity and climate resilience in central New Jersey. Here is a section of NJDEP's Change, or Connecting Habitats Across New Jersey map. On this image, you can see forest core is shown in red and the corridors are blue and yellow. This shows the safest routes for wildlife to travel for shelter, food, and ease of passage. This is defined by a variety of factors, which can be from forest density to riparian habitat. Some of the land in the core forests and corridors have been preserved, and some of it is in fact privately owned. Both healthy habitat and connectivity are critical to keep resident and migratory wildlife populations safe and healthy. The Sourland region acts as a connectivity hub for wildlife throughout the state and beyond. As New Jersey approaches build-out, New Jersey and surrounding states are taking intentional steps to prioritize connectivity to improve resilience in the face of climate change. I had mentioned the importance of the Sourlands as a source for providing drinking water to over 800,000 residents of both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The image was developed and provided by the Watershed Institute. So look at that, bringing it back to them to show off. It's a map of all the riparian habitats throughout our region. As you can see, there are a lot of tributaries, many of which lead to large and important water sources such as the Delaware River or the Raritan. In the center, where you see the densest bit of riparian habitat, is also where our densest forests are. The Sourlands also fits into context of worldwide ecosystem health. As I mentioned earlier, the National Audubon Society has designated the entire Sourland Mountain region as a continental IBA. It is just one of 113 sites in the United States. The white dot on this National Audubon Society map indicates the Sourland Mountain Region IBA. The other dots illustrate where migratory birds live when they're not here. Migratory birds who provide important ecosystem functions from South America to the Arctic rely on the Sourland ecosystem for survival on their journey. Those birds play an important role in our ecosystem and the ecosystems to those other countries as well. Think of the scarlet tanager, an interior forest breeding bird who spends our summer in the Sourlands and our winter in South America controlling pests of the coffee and cocoa. I like to think of the Sourland region, and I'm going off the moment here, is a little bit like I-95. If you're on I-95 and there's a long way between each rest stop, you're really relying on one of those rest stops one day for a pit stop. And if that rest stop happens to be closed, it might be a burden on your day. But for a bird migrating, it could be the matter of life and death. So that brings us to this beautiful little fellow. The ash crisis. Now imagine walking through this forest in 2019. You'd see tall ash trees dominating large sections of the canopy. Within a year or two, most of them would be dead. The culprit was the emerald ash borer, a beetle native to Asia that arrived in the US around 2002 and reached the Sourlands by 2020. Once it showed up, the damage it caused was almost immediate. The beetles lay eggs on the tree, the larvae chew through the vascular tissue, and within 1 to 2 years, the tree can't transport water or nutrients and quickly perishes. Ash decline was a major hit to the Sourlands. First, we see here a graphic that shows all forested land in New Jersey. That bold green line in the middle, let me crack out this cool little device again. Right over here is the Sourland region. Second image, let's see here, there you go, shows all ash trees in New Jersey. And as you can see, Sourland region stands out a little more here because the majority of its trees at the time were in fact ash. The densest concentration of ash, in fact, of all of New Jersey. The third image shows level of carbon sequestration. The Sourland is a huge carbon sink. Ash decline is devastating for many reasons. Imagine the impact on air, water, and habitat and carbon sequestration when over 1 million of those trees die. I swear this is going to get a little more upbeat and hopeful. In the Sourlands, ash made up as much as 1/5 of the forest in our region. That translated to about 1.1 million trees lost in less than 24 months. Picture here an entire forest losing 20% of its canopy almost overnight. Shade disappears, sunlight floods the forest floor, and what's going to happen next? Invasive plants are going to rush in: barberry, honeysuckle, stiltgrass, multiflora rose. Deer are going to eat every native seedling they can find, leaving invasives virtually untouched. And what replaces the ash is not a regenerating native forest, but thickets of invasive shrubs and vines. This is what ecologists call a regeneration crisis. This is a less fun image. This is an all too common view within the Sourlands. I don't think I have to explain to you what those dead trees are. You've been sitting in this presentation for the past few minutes and you're already down about it. Doesn't end with the emerald ash borer or ash trees. Stick with me, people. There's tasty treats outside if you need a little sugar and an upper. The emerald ash borer isn't the only threat, and the Sourlands' older forests are dominated by American beech. These stands have been relatively undisturbed for over a century. And since they've been standing there for over a century, many of them are supported by complex soils and mycorrhizal networks. But we do have a new invader of the beech leaf disease. The loss of ash is a problem that we are still dealing with today. So to compound that with the upcoming loss of beech due to beech leaf disease is a major issue that many of our partners are trying to work on. Where before we could plant to replace ash in disturbed areas, now we're entering into areas where we'd rather not disturb the soil, but sometimes we don't have a choice. To mitigate future damage, what's to be done? With the loss of ash and beech in quick succession, we're looking at a cascade of ecological collapse. Fewer native trees, less wildlife habitat, more invasive cover, and greater vulnerability to storms and flooding. One thing I'll notice, anecdotally I've noticed, is many of the younger ash saplings that are coming up seem to be the most harshly affected. That's likely due to it being less established, less resource reserves in its system. Adult trees are affected and dying from it, but younger saplings seem to be hit pretty hard, which is the opposite of what we've seen with ash trees. So why all this matters? I think many of you know why all this matters, but I'm going to say it again anyway. Healthy forests act like natural infrastructure and filtration. Roots hold soil, prevent erosion, allow for proper drainage of water. Canopy slows rain, cools the surrounding area, and shades streams. Leaf litter filters water and supports aquatic insects. Losing forest affects regional small water cycles. When we lose forest cover, rainfall sheets across land. Flooding worsens, streams erode and fill with sediment. Pollutants flow downstream. Communities like Manville have seen catastrophic flooding, not from coastal storms, but from inland watersheds. What happens in the Sourlands doesn't stay in the Sourlands. It flows into the Delaware, the Raritan, the Millstone, and beyond. Forests and rivers are inseparable. Protect one and you protect the other, lose one and the other will follow. I recently had someone ask me while we were filling out a grant application, do you have any photos of the devastation caused by Hurricane Sandy in your area? And I said, we don't have to look that far back. And it surprises people that Hurricane Sandy obviously was a major tragedy for New Jersey, but often the inland is forgotten, and with something like Hurricane Ida, damages still occur on a massive scale. Loss of trees and forests are a problem that cascade into other issues. So why is it so hard to tackle the issue of lost trees? Forests shouldn't need us to reproduce. They've evolved without us in most cases, so why do we need to be involved at all? Wouldn't the best solution just to let nature be? The answer to that question is no. We have been negatively affecting the environment long enough now where if we are to step back and have a hands-off method and approach, things would not resolve. Things are far too unbalanced as is. One major issue we face are invasive plants. Dr. Doug Tallamy's research has shown that non-native ornamentals support 29 times less animal diversity than do native ornamentals. And when these same ornamentals escape our gardens and run amok in our natural areas, they reduce insect biomass by 96%. Although barberry is invasive here and wreaking havoc in our wild spaces, it is still available for sale. Many states have passed legislation to ban the sale of invasive plants like barberry, but our current administration has vetoed a similar bill in New Jersey. But how do invasive species have such an advantage in our environment if they did not evolve here? Plants have evolved in native regions for hundreds of thousands of years, often even much longer. During this time, they have co-evolved with the animals that live alongside them. Because plants cannot move to escape herbivores, they have developed defense mechanisms to protect themselves. These defenses can be physical, like thorns or tough leaves, or chemical, such as toxins or bitter compounds. This relationship has created what scientists call an evolutionary arms race. As plants evolve new defenses, certain animals evolve ways to overcome them. A well-known example of this coevolution is the relationship between milkweed plants and the monarch butterfly. I just want to take a moment to congratulate myself on learning how to use Canva for this fantastic little design I got up there. That's about the peak of my creativity in the arts. I seem to be missing something there. I don't know where it went, but I did have a picture of a monarch. There was, it just disappeared. So imagine a beautiful monarch. I believe there's a bunch of nature nuts here that have seen a monarch before. The monarch caterpillar is one of the few insects that can feed on milkweed. Milkweed produces toxic chemicals called cardiac glycosides, which most animals cannot tolerate. The monarch caterpillar, however, has adapted to safely eat the plant and store the toxins in its body. As a result, both the caterpillar and the adult butterfly become distasteful to predators. This specialization has a trade-off. Monarch caterpillars can only survive on plants within the Asclepias genus, the milkweeds. Without milkweeds, monarchs cannot complete their life cycle. There are many, many specialist species outside of monarchs within plants and animals that rely on each other. Without one, these species cannot thrive. See, there's that art. This evolutionary arms race has caused many species to avoid anything they haven't co-evolved with. In nature, there are no doctors or hospitals. If an animal eats something that makes it sick, it either recovers from it or it does not. When invasive species enter the picture, the balance is thrown off. Deer, for instance, will focus their browsing on plants they recognize and have evolved alongside with, while avoiding unfamiliar, unpalatable species like barberry. You see what I did there? The blueberries disappear. While blueberry may still be present, it's only a matter of time before barberry fills that empty space. It is a simple example of this because it is often not just, this is a simple example, but because this is not often the case, there's often multiple invasive species and creating more pressure for our natives. Okay, you can see that pretty clearly. I mean, they blend in it a bit, but you can see them. White-tailed deer are a native species to our region. They were an important food source for many predators. They help disturbed areas of vegetation to allow windows of opportunity for other plant species to move in, and they're cute. But we as a species have wiped out major predators in the region, and we are failing in our role as apex predators. In addition, we have created lots of ideal edge habitat. We do not properly manage this species, and because of that, their population is up to 10 to 12 times higher than what it should be for our forests to sustain. This means a couple of things. One, forests cannot naturally regenerate, leaving older generations of trees, but nothing to succeed them when they die. They tip the scales for invasive species, as I had shown with that phenomenal graphic earlier. And we spent a lot of money as an organization just to protect the trees we plant to prevent deer herbivory. So finally, that brings us to our organization. What do we do and how do we deal with these challenges? For starters, nearly 60% of our funding comes from donations. The rest is divided up between grants and business partnerships. And with that money, we find ourselves in a variety of projects to help us not only restore and mitigate the damages to the region's ecosystems, but also to monitor. The biggest and most important detail that ties all of our projects together is the fact that they are all done through partnerships. We as an organization do not own any property. We own no land. Everything is dependent on working together with our partners. Partnerships make this work possible. All of our work takes place on land owned by others, partners who trust us to help restore and care for their properties. In the wake of devastation caused by the emerald ash borer, many of our partners have increasingly prioritized ecological restoration. These efforts are essential but often costly. Many of our partners had to spend a fortune of their budget removing dead ash and had no money to replace those trees. With missions that range from land preservation to education and limited resources to support them, our partners rely on collaboration. By sharing labor, materials, ideas, and planning, we've become a trusted ally. We make sure their contributions are acknowledged and visible, helping their constituents recognize the important work they are also doing. That visibility strengthens their organization and supports their broader missions, whether that's preserving open space, protecting water quality, advocating for sound policy, or educating the next generation. Here we see an image from a project that we have been recently working with, and it's a partnership between us and JCF, or the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and the Raritan Headwaters Association. For this project, each organization contributed a vital piece of the work. The Sourlands Conservancy supplied fencing material and labor. New Jersey Conservation Foundation provided the site and manages its ongoing care. And Raritan Headwaters organized the volunteers and supplied the trees for the planting. 3 organizations working together on a common goal and project that we are all proud of. Together, these efforts are restoring a healthy riparian buffer in an area that was once active farmland, but has since been left fallow. Again, seems like some slides missing here and there, so I apologize. This is just one example of the ecological restoration work we are conducting within the Sourlands. Each project is designed to enhance the local ecosystem in ways that make sense for the specific location. We don't apply a single uniform strategy because there isn't one solution that solves all issues. At some sites, our primary approach involves using tree tubes. In areas prone to flooding or potential tree falls, this method helps us mitigate the loss of trees and materials. This site ended up being a great example of why we tube. Since right after the planting took place, and I apologize because the missing slide has an image of that site just as it was planted, it's right along Morris Creek. And it was a perfect example of why we use tree tubes. Right after the planting took place, there was a major storm. I believe it might have been Hurricane Ida. And the water levels rose up past the bank and pulled massive amounts of large debris through the planting area. Yes, some material was lost and some trees were lost, but it would have been a much different story should we have had fencing up.
Can you say why it would have been a different story if we had fencing up?
So, fencing is, and I'll get into fencing in a moment, but fencing is probably definitely one of the better ways to handle things in the proper environment. But in an area where you can have flooding or tree fall, fencing acts as, let's say, a net. And if you have a massive flood that's carrying debris, that net's going to catch all that debris. And it's not going to be strong enough to hold back that debris. And so now you're going to lose all that fencing. It's going to entangle, and everything you planted within that fenced-in area is also going to become damaged or lost. And once that fencing's open, if something did survive in that, unless it's repaired right away, likely deer will move in immediately and gobble it up. It's a buffet and it's open. But with tubes, while they might not be sightly all the time, when that flooding occurred, it was a much smaller loss for our organization than if we were to have fencing up. Today, just a few years after the planting, this picture would have a much bigger hit if you saw the planting when it first occurred, because you just see the tubes, you don't see anything coming up. But today, just a few years after the planting and the flooding, that site is thriving with trees and shrubs taller than I. They're already producing fruits and nuts, and our stew crew volunteers help by removing tree tubes and etc., removing invasives, and upkeeping the property. This work will give the trees a good, strong head start. Here's one of our volunteers, Sam Guman, one of our former seasonal interns as well, who just decided she liked us so much she'd keep coming back for free. In other areas where I just mentioned, where flooding or tree fall is not a concern, we can rely on fencing instead. This approach allows for natural regeneration to serve as the main driver for ecological recovery. This not only supports the trees or shrubs we plant, but it also supports any growing herbaceous layer, which tubes do not do. Here we see an image of a fence we installed at Rainbow Hill a couple of years ago. There is a stark difference between both sides of the fence. We tend to like this method in areas with minimal invasives and old forests where the soil has not been disturbed for some time. Old soil often contains mycorrhizal networks that can take decades to establish and could be killed off by digging it up with a single shovel. The common thread through all of these strategies is biodiversity. We focus on planting a wide variety of species to reduce the risk of large-scale loss from future ecological threats. In the past, species such as ash and currently beech dominate their respective habitats. So when disease strikes, vast gaps are left behind. By diversifying our plantings, if the next blight targets one of these species, the damage won't be as immense. By planting species B, C, D, and E, if blight comes through and takes out B, well, you still have C, D, and E to take over the area and help protect the canopy. This also prevents a sudden massive increase in canopy loss, making these habitats less vulnerable to invasive species by preventing a sudden flush of sunlight penetrating through. Here is just a little example of our we call nursery. It's really a holding tank, but we have approximately 60 different species of woody plants that we purchase every year. We don't just plant them willy-nilly. We look at the habitat they're going to be going in and we plant what's going to make sense. If there's a bunch of red maple already in the habitat, well, we're not going to plant more red maple, but we're going to plant species that can coexist with those red maple and enhance the habitat. Now, who gets all of this work done? You might recognize someone in the audience here up there. The lion's share of our restoration work is completed by our seasonal interns. Each year we hire 6 paid interns who focus on tree planting and installing deer protection. It's a tremendous amount of work, and their positions are fully funded through grants. However, these grants are often limited in scope, meaning they typically do not cover invasive species removal or long-term site maintenance. That is where our volunteers come in. While volunteers do help with tree planting, most of their time is spent removing invasive species and maintaining restoration sites. We host private volunteer groups ranging from scout troops to corporate teams. But the true backbone of our volunteer program is our stewardship crew. The stew crew meets on the first and third Friday of each month, just in case somebody's off on a Friday. And these individuals are made up of passionate people who dedicate their time and energy year-round. Rain or shine, they're out in the field tackling everything from thorny multiflora rose to the native but troublesome poison ivy. We have a love-hate relationship with poison ivy, and we'll leave it at that. Their dedication keeps our restoration sites thriving and our ecosystems on the path to recovery. One program we've recently started involves partnering with Rutgers University. And this partnership involves them bringing student interns who assist with maintaining our restoration projects. These Rutgers interns help fill in the important gaps that our paid interns cannot, since their work is tied to specific grant requirements. They earn academic credit while gaining valuable hands-on experience in the field. Each student works towards an individualized special learning goal, designed to align with their academic interests and career aspirations. This partnership not only supports our restoration efforts, but also helps cultivate the next generation of environmental stewards. Expanding our role as a regional data repository. This might be boring if you don't like data, but for any data nuts out there, this is fun. In addition to our core stewardship work, the Sourlands Conservancy has increasingly served as a regional repository for ecological data. This expanded role was catalyzed by our longstanding amphibian crossing work in partnership with Mercer County. For years, Mercer County led efforts to coordinate volunteers and collect data at crossing sites throughout the region. However, following a full staff turnover a few years ago, the county stepped back from its leadership role. Unfortunately, with the departure of key personnel, the collected data was in fact lost. A critical gap that underscored the need for a centralized and consistent data steward for the region. Consistent data collection of our various projects, whether they're amphibian crossing, stream monitoring, or rare plants, provides a clearer picture of ecosystem health. This data can be used by the Conservancy and our partners to inform our work to ensure that efforts throughout the region are efficient and effective. One also thing we're proud of is with our partnership with Rutgers, we have our interns collecting actual specimens of plants from the field with permission from landowners. We are then preserving those plants and sending them to the Rutgers Chrysler Herbarium, which then they're kept, if anyone has ever been to, is just like a phenomenal library of physical plants. The last time they had any documentation of something from the Sourlands was 1960s. And prior to that may have been, I believe, the 1930s or 20s. And even then it was minimal. So we aren't collecting anything rare, but we are collecting common species and invasive species, because what's common today might not be common 50 years from now. But what can we do from our home? Whether you live in the Sourlands or miles away, there are steps we can all take to support our local ecosystems and communities, and even contribute to a larger picture of things like the vast bird migrations that span continents. Our gardens and yards are places where we can make visible, meaningful impacts. We can all be good stewards of our own land. Through thoughtful management of our own properties, we can create spaces that benefit both people and nature. We like to say you can be a lazy gardener, because sometimes doing less is actually doing more for the environment. Start by leaving your leaves. If possible, let them stay where they fall, or rake them into garden beds. Leaves enrich the soil, create shelter for insects and small animals, and help retain moisture. Also, wait before cleaning up for spring. Many insects overwinter in leaf litter and hollow stems, not emerging until late April or even as late as May. Imagine the waste of letting that all just rest on your yard in the winter, only to remove their habitat just before they wake up. By delaying cleanup, you give these creatures a chance to complete their life cycle and keep your yard buzzing with life. Another key step mentioned in the last slide is to plant native species. Native plants not only look beautiful, but they also evolve to thrive in the region's climate and soils. Once established, they require less water and maintenance than non-native species. That said, not every non-native species is harmful, but we should be thoughtful about what we introduce. A plant that isn't invasive today could become a problem in the future. By choosing wisely and prioritizing biodiversity, we can ensure our landscapes remain healthy and resilient for years to come. Here's a photo taken on the Women's National Farm and Garden Association presents Designs for Nature garden tour back in June. You can see that there is intent in design, and it's beautiful. Unlike I was mentioning my own yard, which may come off as a bit haphazard. So I'd like to bring us back to the roadmap of myths and go through the facts. Tree planting is just one of the many tools the Conservancy has in its toolbox. We use fencing, we use monitoring, and yes, we plant trees. We are planting a large variety of species. We want to increase biodiversity. A blight is always around the corner, so we can't stop that from happening, but we can mitigate the loss. Invasive plants often travel further from your yard than you see. Again, birds are very, what you call, generous. I often find many gifts growing in my yard that I did not plant. And if I'm lucky, they're native. We have to act on stewarding the environment. There shouldn't be a question mark there. We as a species have been involved in the environment too much. We're capable of some horrendous things to our own environment, but we're also capable of some incredible things. We have a gift of looking at the environment, critically thinking, and looking forward in the future of what can be done with it, and we have to utilize that. The Sourlands is part of a much larger ecosystem, and it doesn't exist in a vacuum. We love the Sourlands. It's a very special place, but a lot of other places depend on the Sourlands, and the Sourlands depends on many other ecosystems as well. What happens in your yard affects your neighbor's yard. What happens in the Sourlands affects around the Sourlands, and vice versa. Native plants come in a variety that can be landscaped just as well as non-native species. That's true. Again, I'm not creative. My yard looks a little messy, but it serves the purpose I want it to serve, which is to feed and shelter wildlife. And there are absolute variety of native species that look gorgeous. I say all the time, this is the kind of job that I could work for 800 years and learn something new every day. And I find that to be true every year when I find out there's a new native species that I have to find a little space in my yard to plant it. There's no more room, but I gotta figure it out. So every shape, color that you can find, native species has it. And deer are native, but their population is unchecked. I love deer. They're a gorgeous animal, and they do serve a purpose, but the balance is not there. 10 to 12 times what it should be in a population scale is not manageable for a forest. Often we look in forests and we can just see clear through it, and that shouldn't be the case. I was once told you should be able to throw a tennis ball into a forest and not see it when it's 15 feet in front of you, and that's just simply not the case. We are not doing our part as apex predators. I also wanted to take this moment, in case my talk wasn't dense enough. There's this piece of literature that you can easily find online and download called the Smart Growth Planning and Management Project for the Sourland Mountain. It has enough information in there for ecology, geology, habitats, and the history of the Sourlands that make it unique and important. I do believe we'll be following up with a link for that, so I do recommend folks check that out. And I want to thank you for sharing your time with me, and I'll start taking questions.
I have a few questions. The first question on the beech tree.
Yes.
You said it was due to an invasive nematode. Are there some beneficial nematodes that can help with that, or how are we combating that?
So while I'm not in research, I haven't heard any wind of a beneficial nematode to help combat that nematode. Last I've known about, the only real way to combat that is to essentially feed the trees. Give the trees, giving them nourishment, giving the trees nutrients, keeping them healthy. Because it's not the nematode itself that ends up killing the tree. It's just like anything else where it weakens the tree and eventually other things will take its toll on it. The nematodes live in the overwintering buds of the tree, And so when those trees, those leaves leaf out, that's when you see those bands, and eventually they just weaken the leaves over time, and less and less leaves leaf out every year. So the tree is not getting the proper nutrients it needs. But that's all well and good for individual trees on somebody's property, but on a scale of a forest, it's just not manageable or feasible. In terms of any research outside of that, I'm not entirely sure.
Now, the ash trees,
Mhm.
I had a good number of them. The bigger ones died, but it turns out I've got some smaller ones.
Mhm.
I've got younger ones that still look healthy. How do we keep them healthy?
So it's tricky, and there's some hope there, but being in environmental work my whole life, I'm often pessimistic. But yes, the emerald ash borer only affects mature ash. So there is the hope that by the time these saplings get mature enough, that hopefully the emerald ash borer has used up essentially its stock supply of mature trees, and the population has either plummeted or doesn't exist in our area. The likelihood of that, I would imagine, is low. The chances are that once those trees reach to a certain size, they too will be infected by an emerald ash borer. There's the slightest hope that there may be one or two or any amount of them that are genetically have evolved to combat that. Again, the emerald ash borer, where it comes from and its native habitat, still affects ash trees, but those ash trees have evolved to form a gall around where the emerald ash borer is infecting. Our ash trees haven't gotten to that point, so the hope is that maybe one day one just may. But in order to prevent it, there are treatments that you can do for your individual trees. How long-term that is, what the expense of that is, I'm not sure about. Again, it might be that the population of the emerald ash borer goes down to a minuscule amount. We think it's gone, then suddenly all the ash trees start getting infected again as the population booms. So outside of treating an individual tree, I think it's pretty hard to keep an eye on your tree and pick off every emerald ash borer that lands on it.
One more question.
Sure.
I had noticed, I'm in the woods, I've had lots of springs pop up all over the place. I noticed last year, after the drought that we had the year before, my sump pump was always dry. In the 30, 40 years I've lived there, it was never dry. And I noticed I don't have the springs, I don't have the water flow, and we've tried to defer the water from the house so that we'd save the house. I don't have the water flow that I had, and I was talking to my neighbor who has the same issue with it's a gravity thing in their basement that takes the water out. She says hers has been dry. Is that something new? Could that have been caused by the earthquake? I mean, we're just kind of confused as to why not only are we dry, we're dry underground.
I'm sure this, like many things, are the effect of many causes. We have been going through substantial droughts. There's also the sheer fact that you mentioned you had ashes on your property, correct?
Pardon?
You had ash trees on your
Yes.
property at one point?
Yes.
There also might be the factor of the loss of the root system, so the water's not filtering properly down into the ground like it once did in your property and sheeting out elsewhere. It's one of those situations where I'm sure it's more than just one thing. What that is, I couldn't say. I will go back briefly on the ash and the controlling the emerald ash borer. There has been research being done with releasing wasps that are native to Russia and other regions that have been in research and testing for over 10 years now. And these are small, like real small, non-stingy wasps that use the emerald ash borer for reproduction, just as you see with many wasps using caterpillars. So their hope is that they can release those to control the population, if not wipe out the population of the emerald ash borer, and then once they're gone, the wasp dies out with it. we'll see.
So I can imagine the issue with the Emerald Ash Borer is too widespread to think about this right now, but are blights and invasive bugs like this something that you can control by isolation and separating sections of whatever species they affect, or is it something that's so widespread that that's not really feasibly possible?
So I think it depends on the scale. My in-laws live in Valley Stream on Long Island, which is a real populated area. Not a lot of forests. They have some woods, but nothing crazy. And there is a ash tree that's a street tree in her neighborhood that's untouched. It's just a mature ash. I mean, it's hurting because it's a street tree and it's an ash, but it's alive and it's not hurting from emerald ash borer. That might be a situation where it's isolated enough that just there's no other ash in the area, so the emerald ash borer hasn't made its way over there. In terms of controlling an invasive species by quarantining regions or sections, I think if we were able to do that, we would have done it better by now. There's just a lot of, I mean, we have our recent issue with the lanternfly, where that thing, I mean, it doesn't necessarily as an individual insect travel that far, but it's pretty widespread along the East Coast now. And people are doing their best to squish it, but there's always, all you need is one to get through, and it causes havoc.
I was just gonna say, there's a lot of things that humans can do to help contain something like this too, like not moving firewood. And with the spotted lanternfly, being careful that you're not bringing the lanternfly or its egg masses into places where they don't already exist. Because a lot of these critters can't move very readily, but the humans are inadvertently helping them move. So keep firewood where it is. Don't take firewood from a place where there is emerald ash borer into the place where you're gonna be camping. Like, use firewood where you're camping. Keep firewood in place, because those critters move along so readily when you are just doing something so innocent, like, I'm just gonna go camping for the weekend, how bad can it be? I'm just gonna be fishing, so I'll just dump my bait out here. You know, think very carefully before moving things that are living to a new space, because you can really wreak havoc with anything from like jumping worms to ash borers to spotted lanternflies.
And I think also the problem is a lot of these solutions of controlling them are relatively simple on paper. But you're here listening to me talk. You're all the choir. Many of you are very up to snuff when it comes to knowing about invasive species, knowing proper management of that. Most people necessarily in the day-to-day don't. You can often see online people posting about spotted lanternflies and how gorgeous they are and how they refuse to kill them because they're, you know, a living thing. And I do sympathize with people who have an issue with killing living things. When I talk about controlling the deer population, it's not done out of complete joy of killing a living thing, but it's done out of my responsibility, I believe, as a species, as a proper apex predator, to manage a population, to help the ecosystem. When we have an imbalance in things, like, so again, I'll go back to the deer. Let's go public enemy number one here. The deer are eating other animals out of house and home. Turkey populations go down because there's less shrubbery and low, you know, bush for them to nest in. Yeah, that's great that you don't want to kill the deer, but they, and in fact, are killing other animals in the process.
Most of it tastes pretty good.
And it does.
Could you speak to how the Sourlands encompasses a large area? How does the Conservancy prioritize restoration projects?
Yeah, so the way we prioritize restoration projects is often communicating with our partners. We will go to the Watershed Institute, we'll go to Somerset County, and we'll go to NJCF, and we'll ask them, do they have any plans in place? Do they have any ideas? And often we'll work off of whatever ideas they may have. Often too, we will have an idea ourselves and we say, hey, you have a riparian habitat here that could use X, Y, and Z. Is that something that we can do together? Over the years, we have shifted our priority targets as an organization. Yes, number one, we follow whatever our partners are doing, but if they don't have any ideas, as of right now, we're trying to focus on core forests, where we can put up fencing to allow for natural regeneration. We're trying to look at what to do to mitigate the loss of beech trees. So we're looking at these beech forests, and we're looking at riparian habitats. Riparian habitats tend to be the ones when we work in are mostly disturbed and not proper buffers, but the effects of them are immediate. Flooding is a major issue, so we like to try to prioritize those areas and working on them, even sometimes over an old forest area, because again, the flooding is such an immediate issue. So yes, riparian habitats, I'd say, are our focus right now. In the past, it was really focusing on where the largest loss of ash was. But again, with the loss of ash that happened so quickly, after the first year or so, we couldn't hit every area that had ash loss. So immediately invasive species moved in. And so areas today that have experienced immense ash loss, we still do work in, but we're a little more hesitant about jumping into those areas unless we have a proper maintenance plan, because they're already so invaded that what little work we do there is going to take an immense amount of follow-up.
I had heard something about a bacteria of some sort on the red oak tree.
Oak wilt?
Oak wilt?
Yeah.
Is that something we should be worried about?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, beech right now are a big concern, but oak wilt is another concern with many of our partners. Now, oak wilt primarily infects, sadly, the red oak, which is our stage tree. It also does affect pin oak. It's one of those things that, depending on who you talk to, there's a certain level of optimism or pessimism of how bad it's going to be or how bad it's getting. Oak wilt primarily infects trees publicly that have been pruned at certain times of year, because then the infection will get into those wounds. So it's one of those situations where you have a red oak on your property that you get pruned. Research, and I can't tell you off the top of my head when's the best time to prune, but research when it's time to do that. Because of that, though, we do still plant red oak trees because there's still that chance, but we don't spend as much money on purchasing red oak because that is a possibility. So that's something that we do pay attention to.
But I understand it can be treated.
Not entirely sure how treatable it is. Anytime I've spoken with any of our partners about oak wilt, it's been one of those situations that they just rather cut down the tree. It depends on where it is. Most of the time when talking about cutting down a tree, it's on like a path or a safety hazard.
I know I believe that Sourlands is approximately 90 square miles.
Mhm.
And how much of that does a stew crew get a chance to address? I mean, you're focused in certain areas, or a plan to track to deal with the entire 90 square miles?
Yeah, so our stew crew, as feisty and aggressive they are with removing invasives, there's only so much they can do. And every year that passes, we have more and more project sites. So it's something that we've been holding our partners more accountable to helping manage their properties. When we had started this venture, we pretty much started the sites and worked them ourselves. But now we're doing a little more 50-50 when possible. But at the same time, many of our older sites don't need as much upkeep. If something is 5 years old, which once we might have had to go to 4 times a year, maybe we go to once a year. So again, now that we also are spreading ourselves so widely out there and spreading such a blanket, we try to prioritize sites that make sense. If something is just going to be a complete nightmare to upkeep, it's just not worth the time or money at the moment, and we'll focus our resources and energy on sites that we can handle. And we'll also, again, talk with our partners. Is this something that they can maintain? Obviously, there's good days and bad days. Sometimes they won't get around to it and they let us know. But our stew crew has got a full schedule, and they keep busy. And for the most part, most of our sites go pretty well with the schedule. Had your hand up earlier?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting that you guys don't have land and you work so heavily with partners. So I imagine at this point, like so many of these partnerships are like so well developed. But like for the project you were talking about with like 3 different parties, like
Yeah.
to do this like massive stewardship undertaking, how? What's like your best tip for like big stewardship projects, work with partners? Like what have you seen that works well?
So I'm really, really happy about that project because a little backstory, that was a grant that Raritan Headwaters had put out. And they said, if you're within this region, we'll provide trees and help organize volunteers. But they were just on the northern sliver of what is considered our range. So right away, Lori and I cracked out maps, and we were looking at all the riparian habitats that might be affected within that slight sliver of our 90 square miles. And we had like 3 or 4 sites circled, and we were like, okay, this falls in Somerset County property, this falls in Rainbow Hill. So like, let's reach out to the partners. Even before we reached out to them, both of them reached out to us like, hey, we're applying for this grant and we have these sites. Would you guys want to go in on it? And we're like, great, we don't even have to fill out the paperwork. They'll handle it. And so Somerset County and JCF both reached out to us, and that's how that one started. And how we got to that point was proving that we could do the work and proving that we could utilize their resources with respect. Just standing here like something's going on.
I just want to say this guy is a pro at
No, I told you when I started, I can't take compliments. If you start doing this now, I'm going to crack up. I only deal with negativity.
approaching something like that as it's a puzzle, right? Figuring out where do we fit in. So we have the capability of doing lots of things, but we don't have the bandwidth to do it all. So we rely on partners to do whatever part they can contribute, and we try to fill in the rest. And if we can't, bringing in another partner who can. So he is excellent at doing this, and actually at sitting down with a partner and just honestly saying, what can you contribute, because we can't do the whole thing. We are a tiny organization, and if we spread ourselves too thin, it would be at everybody's peril. But figuring out how we can be a strong partner and how we can do what, our best work within the space that we can work, it's really tricky. But Rob and his team are super, super good at it. And so I couldn't not just sit in my chair and say, Rob does a great job at it.
This is hard.
Managing a project, just figuring out the dates, like when can we do this? How are we gonna do it? How much is it gonna cost? What's the right number of trees and shrubs for this area? What's the right mix? Where are we gonna get it? How are we gonna pay for it? There's just so many moving parts. So partnership is wonderful, and we really couldn't do our work without it. But I really have to give credit to Rob and to all our partners for being able to figure out how to make these things work, because it is really tricky. And then one thing comes through like, wow, you've got a great group of volunteers who are set for this date, and you've got your trees coming in and everything's going smooth, and then a big storm comes through. Or, or the fencing doesn't show up, or someone pulls out their funding. And so now maybe we have to contribute more. We've just run into an issue with that. So that's a big surprise, and we don't have the budget to cover that. So if anybody's watching from home and they're just trying to figure out what to do with a windfall that may have just received, and please send it our way. But the thing is, if we have to then pause that, we're letting everybody down, or we feel like we're letting everyone down. That project can't occur. And maybe now that area will become degraded. So we've got this sweet spot of being able to work in that space. We really try to make it work. Are we going to need to bring in more volunteers? We're going to need to bring in another partner. How are we going to get this done? So being able to, come in every day with a big smile on your face and a go get 'em attitude, it's hard, but you know, Rob and his team, and these interns right here, over here, I mean, everyone who's ever interned for the Conservancy, please raise your hand.
They're plants.
Because they work hard day in, day out. I mean, coming in, it's 80 degrees, and oh no, today it's 30 degrees, or it's raining, or it's just beastly hot, or you gotta bring out your rock pick because, you know, this isn't just all fertile land. A lot of it is very stony. And they come in also ready to go, sleeves rolled up and ready to dig. And so you got to give it to them too, because without it, we really could not make this work. 10,000 trees a year, 6 interns, big bunch of volunteers, and very few staff, 4.5 full-time staff at the Conservancy. So it's a tiny but mighty crew, but our partners are making it happen. So thanks to all. Yes.
Question about money. I know you said the Conservancy garners most of its budget from individual contributions.
Almost 60% of our budget.
So to the, and to the extent you can speak about your partners, I'm just curious, the grant dollars that you and your partners are getting, is it primarily state, county, not, you know, private foundations? Where is that money coming from, and how does the current political nightmare impact that? Or how do you anticipate it will impact that over the next few years, particularly with the gubernatorial election coming up that could really wreak havoc in the state?
That. So we get our grant funding from a variety of sources, but a lot of those sources are re-grants. So that federal funding issue that you're touching on there.
So grants meaning federal dollars trickling down to local sources that then get.
That does happen, and also the kind of the economy, people aren't sure what to do, and so some of the foundations where we're getting our funding, you know, that is a little bit up in the air as well. But the federal funding, we don't have a ton of direct federal dollars. We did get through FOVOS, we applied for a U.S. Forest Service grant a few years ago, and we did get a generous amount of money from that we had been using to plant on private land. But we have worked through those grant dollars, so we're at the end of that U.S. Forest Service grant. But our partners who do rely on those federal funds, some of those grants had been awarded, and the money may be getting clawed back now. So that's impacting some of the work that we're doing for sure now, and we're expecting that's going to really impact our work in the future. So whether that means the grants that we're applying for, which we still are applying aggressively for grants, but you know, those grant dollars are drying up quite a bit, and our partners too, who also rely on that type of funding, are also feeling a pinch. So whether it's individual donations, state, federal, foundations, wherever the money is coming from, we're seeing a lot of that kind of shrinking. So it is impacting us. And like I like to say, this is a hopeful story because so much of what we do relies on so many people. And so there are a lot of us. And even if everyone just gives a little bit, even if everyone just plants a single native species in their yard, even if everyone just tells one friend, hey, I'm going to a Sourlands Conservancy event, you want to come along? Then, you know, it grows. There are so many of us. It used to be an issue, you know, where we were like, oh, humans, there's such a blight on this ecology. But now the story has reversed, right? Now humans can be such a positive influence on the ecology that we all rely on. So since we all have two hands and there are so many of us, the amount of work and the amount of change that we can cause is almost unlimited. We just have to work together.
And if you don't mind me cutting in, well, I will say, Lynn, just a side note, if anyone can find any grant funding for keeping our hype person activated, that'd be nice.
The coffee and chocolate
The coffee
fund.
and chocolate. But especially today, a lot of people kind of feel helpless on a grand scale of things. And I try to press upon people as much as I can, where if you feel like you have lack of control in what's going on in the bigger picture, work locally, help your community. There's a lot to be said about what can be done in your own backyard. And when I say your own backyard, I can even mean state level. But we're at a time where we realize we can have a major effect in our own area, with our neighbors, with our communities, or even, and I'm biased obviously for small environmental nonprofits, but putting your time and energy in what you believe in is probably one of the best things you can do right now.
Can I tag in on that really quickly? A lot of the native species that we put in I live up in the Sourlands, and, up north of, if you go past Hillbilly Hall, you go up there, I live up there. And a lot of the things that we put in our yards, I'm starting to see in the woods around the house, or seeds have gotten into the stream and gone down. And I know none of my neighbors have that plant, and it's like, that must come from my and it's just it just lifts us up to see that. Or like, my neighbors all think I'm nuts because I'm always out with a shovel at the roadside, digging up a little tree, walking it back 30 feet into the woods and putting it back in there, put a little cage around it. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, well, the township mower is gonna take that tree, so I'm gonna put it back in there. And a lot of those trees are thriving, and I forget about them. I'm like a squirrel learning. I plant it and I forget about it, and then 3 years later, it's like, oh, I gotta get a taller fence back there. So even just these little acts that just lifts you up. And then the same neighbors that, 10 years ago thought I was just a crazy lady, they're now like, where can I get a tree like that? It's like, call the Sourlands Conservancy, call the website.
That's the other thing too, is if, again, we're all here, we're all supporting Sourland Conservancy, but I tell people too, don't be intimidated by getting involved. You can walk with an expert and still teach them something. Like I said before, you can do this for 800 years, learn something new every day. It is intimidating to step into this realm. Again, I came from a marine biology and fisheries biology background, but when I came in, everyone in this realm are just so open and so welcoming. And I've always liked plants, but I was never passionate about plants. And then I came here, and then everyone was so excited about, terrestrial ecology that it became infectious. And now I'm incredibly annoying everywhere I go, land or sea. You can't shut me up.
That's a fact. I just wanted to go back to this slide really quick. I took this picture, and Sam, I just wanted to illustrate how, we're talking about leaving a healthy legacy for future generations. And when you're talking about forest restoration, you have to have a really long view, right? These trees aren't going to reach maturity for a very long time. And what's the saying about planting a tree that you will never sit in the shade of?
Right.
Sam is in the shade of the tree that she planted. This is not just for future generations. And when we went out there to visit that site, she and I both started to tear up, because just seeing those trees thriving, and I mean, there were acorns, there was elderberries, this site was a hayfield. This is adjacent to Howell Farm. This was a hayfield, and the stream, the riparian buffer, and if anyone's not sure what a riparian buffer is, I know we've been talking about it a lot, but anyway, it's the land that's adjacent to a stream. The riparian buffer was, the hayfield went right up to the stream, basically. And so flooding was a real issue. Erosion was a real issue. And, Mercer County and the AmeriCorps Watershed Ambassadors and the Sourland Conservancy were using a grant from the Nature Conservancy that had gone through the Watershed Institute. And some of the plants, I think, were provided by Fish and Wildlife. I'm telling you, this was a massive, very complex planting. And volunteers came out, and we planted 1,500 trees. and shrubs. And they're fruiting, you know, fruit is very evident. Nuts are coming out and you're just thinking, this is not just
this
for
room right
future
now.
generations. This is for us. You know, this benefits us. Birds and other wildlife are taking advantage of those trees right now. And so this isn't something we have to wait forever. We can really enjoy this now. We can reap the benefits of this planting that we're doing. So if you do something like this in your own yard, this is what you find. And it doesn't take very long.
And I'm pretty bummed out because there's like about 5 missing slides that somehow didn't transfer over in here. But one of them was what this looked like, with it being mowed right up to the water's edge. And to see then, you know, grass growing and these tall trees and shrubs. There are buttonbush that are almost twice my height. And I took a video earlier in the year by it, and it was just buzzing. You can hear it from, you know, 20 feet away. It was just buzzing with life.
So gratifying.
And-
So gratifying.
And again, all of these projects, you hear how many people are involved with them because these projects are huge. They're bigger than any one organization, but that's where we are. We're dealing with existential problems. And so we have to all work together as a community. And again, it's one of those situations where you're like, I'm not an expert in this, or I'm just one person, but like together we can all put our ideas together. We can all work together on this stuff because that's really what it's about. I mean, I work with experts all of the time and I watch them learn new things. All the work we do is based on the best science we have now. What the best science is going to be tomorrow, probably different, but we're working with what we know now. And that's just what we know. And that's, I think, is a testament to how our organization does things, is where we know where our faults are. We know when we make mistakes and then we learn from them, because every organization is going to be making mistakes. And I tell people all the time, make mistakes. That's how you're going to learn. Make mistakes in your own yard. Plant things. Don't be hesitant because you think something's not going to make it. Try it out. If it doesn't work, what did we learn? Try it again. It's really about trying things.
Yeah, and planting diverse plants makes a more resilient environment, right? So we know that planting lots and lots of different types of plants makes the forest more resilient. So we just do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have, with the skills that we have, with the tools that we have. And we rely on our partners as well for that type of information. Like Jay Kelly and Emily Stander were here a couple weeks ago talking about the research that they're doing, just to find out what we're doing, how well it's working, how it's impacting the water, you know, and we'll take that data and we'll use that to inform our future plantings. To your earlier question about how we prioritize, you know, we started out prioritizing the change, connecting habitats across New Jersey, change corridors. And we really lean in on that because connecting habitat is so critical. And that's where you're coming in, planting native at home, because 1/3 of the Sourlands is privately owned. And so we can work until, you know, sun up to sundown on public land, but we can't connect habitat without folks like you and me planting native at home, whether it's in our hedgerow or rolling back our yard and planting a McMeadow, or just putting some native plants in a flower pot. That provides connectivity, which is critical for wildlife's health. So the monarch that we didn't see today on the slide, you know,
1 of 5.
that butterfly can only fly so far before getting something else to eat. So here you are, you know, you're laying your eggs on a plant and then, you know, migrating in that. You need plants that are close by. So even if my neighbor only has a flower pot to plant a milkweed in, you know, a butterfly flying from my house will need to stop over. So that flower pot milkweed, yeah. Oh, there's a milkweed right there. Makes a huge difference.
Just pull that out of your bag.
Yeah, quick plug for our partners who have plant sales too. Bowman's Hill, DNR Greenway, Fovos, they have fantastic plant sales. So native plants can be expensive, but New Jersey Native Plant Swap is a group that's on Facebook, and you can go on there and say, I'm looking for a milkweed I want to plant in my place, and someone will likely have a pod and they'll share. There are plant swaps too that My Backyard at Nectar's hosts, and there's just a ton, there's a fantastic community here of folks who love to plant native and will be happy to share seeds and plants. So don't let that stop you either. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we love to talk about native plants.
Love it. Love it.
So, and providing resources is something that we do. Advice, seeds, plants, you name it, we're here for you. Yeah. Oh, and really quickly, you were talking about how do we prioritize, what does this crew do? There are a lot of sites in the Sourlands that are so heavily degraded that there's no way that we could ever have time or energy or, you know, the ability to bring those back. And I think that the research is still kind of out there on how to really restore a heavily degraded site. So we don't focus our efforts there. The New Jersey Invasive Species Strike Team, fabulous resource that Phobos has that gives you advice as a homeowner on how to control native or invasive plants on your property. I use it a lot, but our stew crew focuses more on our planting sites so that we can make sure that those new sites have a healthy start. And then, as Rob said, as time goes on, they don't need that kind of heavy attention, and the stew crew moves on to other newer sites.
You focus on where you can make the biggest difference.
Yes.
Yeah, especially in a time where we're talking about funding. You have to make your dollar stretch, and you have to be smart with it. And yes, we're hoping for a windfall in the future, so we can be a little more, you know, hard on certain areas, but
Emerging invasives is another thing that you really just have to watch out for. And as a homeowner, I'm constantly battling invasives on my own property. I only have 3 acres, but wow, yeah, it is really big when it's covered with multiflora rose, I'll tell you that. It just expands.
Well, your message of informing is probably one of the biggest differences, and I think that's what really makes a difference for someone who's not as trained or understands, is just understanding what the issues are, and being cognizant of what's around you, and then dealing with the local conditions.
Yeah. All right, we're just about out of time. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have one question, it might be silly, but like, right, native plants are so expensive to buy them as a plant. Right now, our meadows are full of free seeds. Are people doing that, like going out and, like, I did that, and now I have a jar of seeds. Someone's like, what's that? I'm like, that's my jar of seeds from the meadow. I don't know, like, is that a thing that you guys have ever done, or do you think there's some?
We host seed swaps, but we
Okay.
can't stress enough how you need to get permission from the landowner.
yeah.
I got a
Before you
lot.
collect anything on
Yeah, don't leave here going, oh, Sourland Conservancy said I could take this, and then, you know. And we do put out there for people to collect things on their own properties. So our provider for just about everything we buy is Pinelands Nursery. And a lot of what they source is from mostly southern New Jersey. They are trying to expand elsewhere to northern New Jersey and central. But we do ask people collect acorns, nuts, and everything on their own property of native species if they can get up to 250 seeds of an individual, and then drop that off at our office. Because then we take those seeds, bring them to Pinelands, they grow it for us, and then we buy it back and try to plant it in the region in which they were collected. But we do put emphasis on 250 or more, labeled where they're from and what they are. Saying oak and then having 3 different species of oak doesn't work for Pinelands because someone's gonna have to sort through it otherwise. But that is one of the ways we're trying to at least, you know, increase the survivability of a lot of these plants.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So we're looking for Sourland ecotype seeds. So if you have an old hedgerow on your property, or you have a really old wood stand, so you know that those trees weren't probably planted by yourself or the landowner prior to you, but likely grew up there. Those are the kinds of seeds that we're especially looking for, because those kind of Sauerland region ecotype seeds are going to produce plants that will thrive here in the Sourlands, because they have been here for a very long time, and they have, you know, adapted to this clay rock that we call soil. And they thrive in that. So plants from, as Rob was saying, from maybe somewhere else may not thrive here. And we really want to do the best we can to make the forest as resilient as it can be. So stronger trees that have evolved here are really what we're looking for. That's the gold.
And people can bring these acorns to you guys.
Just
Yes.
drop them off at our doorstep. Just give us a heads up.
They'll
But
be
yeah.
like a big vat.
In a container,
container.
labeled with species name. Again, 250 or
name.
more. Yeah, your name is helpful.
And your street address?
Or a town at least. Just in case you don't want everyone to know your address. Who's the nut that dropped off the nuts? Yeah.
Me.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So, are we ready to wrap up?
All right, well, thank you for your time.
All right, so I have a little bit to say.
Oh, okay. There's more.
All right.
Oh, geez.
Thank you again, Rob, for sharing your presentation and for all of the important work that you and your team do. Thank you all for your interest in our work and for supporting that work. Please help us spread the word. If you are in a position to donate, please do, but you will be receiving a link to the recording to this presentation. Please do share that with your friends. If you're on social media, please like, comment, and share on our posts. Sophia is working really hard to get the word out about the Sourlands, but we really need your help to spread the word. The Conservancy and many of our community partners are facing serious choices due to federal funding cuts. As you know, we receive nearly 60% of our funding from individual donors like you, so please help if you can. Thanks again to the Watershed Institute, to Sourland Conservancy staff and volunteers. I really just can't thank you guys enough. This has been really fantastic. Please, everyone, watch your inbox for the follow-up email with the reference links and materials to learn more about tonight's topic. And if you like data, we have an online version of this that you'll be referring to all the time for all of your juicy Sourlandish facts. So please watch your inbox for that follow-up email. And if you have any questions related to tonight's talk, about the Sourland region, the Sourland Conservancy, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to info@sourland.org. Thanks again, and have a good night.